Okay, welcome everyone. Today I want to talk about the disruptive economic impact of artificial intelligence. I believe AI is the most powerful technology humans have ever had access to, and here we want to look at what does this mean for the future of our economies, the future of businesses. And I am very pleased to say that I am joined today by Joshua Gans, who has just co-authored a new book called Power and Prediction: The Disruptive Economics of Artificial Intelligence. So welcome, Joshua.
Thanks for having me.
It's good, so good to have you on again. Last time we spoke about your 2018 book that you co-authored, The Prediction Machines, which did very well. Today, you are working at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, where you hold the chair for technical innovation and entrepreneurship. So the first book was amazing. It did really well. Why did you feel the need to write another one?
Well, the first book was really an attempt to try and understand uh, what the basic economics were of the recent developments in artificial intelligence. So we didn't want to think about, AI as it was in pop culture, but AI as it was being implemented using new techniques in machine learning, called deep learning and also reinforcement learning. And our theme of that book was that you could represent artificial intelligence as doing one thing, as doing better prediction. And so, from an economic point of view, what you had is this technological advance that now made prediction in many environments orders of magnitude cheaper to do. And
Mm.
so, we explored the implications of that and how businesses might look for problems inside their businesses, whereby they could uh, deploy a prediction machine to make better decisions. What we did not emphasize much and consider was the difficulty of that. And so, with the benefit of hindsight, now 3 or 4 years since we wrote that book, uh, we've found that the rate of adoption of artificial intelligence by businesses has been slower than everybody anticipated at that time. And so it was, why was that the case? The advances seem great. They still seem great. We've had very recent advances in using prompts to come up with very different forms of art and pictures and even videos. We've seen advances such as GPT in these large language learning models. So the AI advances are going on strong and are cracking some big puzzles. But the broader impact of artificial intelligence hasn't uh, been transformational. And so we felt we needed to write a book that explored why that was so and how businesses should approach artificial intelligence if they're looking for something transformational.
Very good. And Harvard Business Review Press, who published the book, have thankfully given me a preview copy to read, and I really enjoyed it, I have to say. And there's so much to dive into and explore. So you start the book by drawing parallels from other industrial revolutions, in particular the move from gas to electricity, which was the second industrial revolution that we've gone through. And you outline three different ways to use this: a point solution, an application solution, and a system solution. Do you want to briefly outline why this is a good analogy, and what those three different approaches are?
Yes. So this, you're exactly right. What we did was look back in history at other uh, large transformational innovations and tried to tease out lessons that we may or may not be able to apply for artificial intelligence. And so, looking at the history of the adoption of electricity, there were some very interesting features. And I'm thinking mainly about the adoption of electricity by businesses. Businesses took many decades to power, for instance, their machines by electricity. Typically, a machine would be powered by some form of water generation of power, and that was a difficult thing because you had a constant source of power coming into the factory at a single point. And then you'd have a machine doing multiple things that had to hang off that same degree of power. So you had all these belts and pulleys and levers and other things. It was very, very difficult to to harness all that energy. So electricity comes along, and electricity has this great property that you can have a generator, and it can do what water generation was doing. So you no longer had to be near, near a source of water to create steam. You could now create that same electrical using electrical power using a generator. And most of the initial adoptions of that were just to swap out the steam engine for the electric engine at the factory. And so that's what we call a point solution. Here we have this alternative form of power. We're using power. We'll just switch the old one to the new one. It's the point solution. But all of the belts and pulleys and levers and where the factory was and all that sort of thing didn't change. As electricity got more developed, they realized that actually what you could do with electricity is ironically scale it down. You could take an individual machine performing a certain function, and you could reconfigure that machine to be powered by a small electrical engine. Now, that was a great thing because the thing you could do is, whereas a steam power would be running all the time, whether you used all the steam energy or not, if you had little electric engines with different sorts of machines, what you could do is turn them off. So that already gave you some benefits of efficiency in terms of you didn't have to sort of waste all this power generation. So it was terrific for that. But we call that an application solution because it took the power source, and because it had better features, in this case, an off button and a smaller scale, you could develop new applications for that power, new machines and things like that. So that's an application solution. And then finally, and this took 4 decades really to work out, is factories worked out, they used to build these things in the middle of cities. That was where a lot of the power source was coming, was all at the one location. Land was expensive. The things had to be designed. So factories were sort of these large vertical entities, quite dangerous in many respects working near. Whereas if all of a sudden you have a whole lot of machines that you can have an off button for, and you have an electrical power source which can scale up and down depending on how much use you're using for it, you are no longer encumbered to be located in that same place. And in fact, you can go where land is cheaper, and you can lay out a factory in a horizontal way, placing things better in the flow of things rather than everything tied to this single source of power that was running all the time. And, the quintessential example of that was the assembly line of the Ford factory building out Model Ts. That wouldn't have been possible to have an assembly line like that with machines available where they're needed, as opposed to being close or integrated into the source of power. So we call that sort of solution a system solution. And that's when electricity became really transformative. The take-up of electricity was very modest until such time as the factories started reconfiguring themselves to use it properly. So that's what has happened in history. And so we wondered if with artificial intelligence, thinking about, in particular, point solutions versus system solutions, was going to give us some insight into some of the issues in adopting AI.
Very good. Yeah, and then throughout the book, you're making the argument that we need to move beyond point solutions. That at the moment there are lots of point solutions. These are easy to implement, but actually the most transformative impact will happen once we get these system solutions. And obviously, with all of this come all the benefits that companies can reap from all of this.
Right.
So maybe you can give us an outline of what that means in terms of what's the difference between a point solution and a system solution when it comes to AI.
Yes. So, we were careful, the history points us in a certain direction. But, what a system that utilizes AI, a new system, looks like, is something we don't have a full grasp of. What we do instead is say, well, what gives rise to a system element? What gives rise to a system element is when you want to adopt AI, it sort of disrupts the rest of the organization if you want to use it properly. So just to step back a second, AI is a drop in the cost of prediction, which means that you'll use AI to sort out uncertainty with regard to your decision making. In the absence of AI, many of the decisions you make are almost not decisions at all. You tend to shield yourself away from uncertainty. And so you adopt things like rules, where you always do this. It works most of the time, regardless of what's happening outside. And sometimes you construct everything to make that even better. When you want to adopt prediction, the whole idea of prediction is you get a different prediction and you do a different action as a result of that prediction. You don't do prediction for prediction's sake. It's like it would kind of be odd for you to spend a lot of time looking at your weather app and never change whether you're going to take an umbrella or not, or what you're going to wear. The weather app is giving you a forecast of the day and should influence the actions that you take. So given that, let's think about how that would work in an organization. An organization, as per our first book, identifies a particular task. That task can be is surrounded by uncertainty, which previously has been a barrier, but now artificial intelligence can assist in that. What's that going to do? For that task now, it's going to be sometimes you're going to choose one thing, sometimes another thing, etc., etc. Now, that's all very well if that task sort of sits there in complete isolation, where the rest of the organization doesn't care what you're doing, just so long as you're doing it well. It just benefits. But what if that isn't the case? What if the rest of the organization has to align itself with the decision or the particular actions you happen to be taking? Well, then you've got a problem. The problem is, if you don't tell the rest of the organization what you're doing, all of a sudden they're trying to guess what you're going to do the next day or what you're doing minute to minute or anything, because you were previously very reliable because you were ignoring uncertainty. Now you have a prediction. That's good for you, your little part of the organization. But now, from the perspective of everybody else, you're doing a whole lot of different things. Most organizations, you need to align yourself with that type thing. And so the transformation is, well, how do we do that? How do we do that? One route could be we double down on pushing your task in its own little bubble and ignore, let it run on its own. But that sort of seems like, yes, that solves this disruption problem, but that doesn't seem long term. In other words, we make you more, okay, you're a point solution, but we don't want you to be too disruptive for us. The other thing you could do is, of course, reconfigure the organization. Now, okay, part of the organization is now doing different things. We now need to communicate that, and we now need to coordinate it, and we now need to decide if we need to do different things as well. And it's that sort of process takes a lot of time. It's akin to the electricity example. The electricity example was basically, now that we've got this electricity in it, to take it full advantage of it, we've got to change how the organization works. We wonder if the same sort of thing could apply for artificial intelligence, and what would that look like? And in terms of what it looks like, well, you're not going to change the organization for just a mild improvement in prediction. But if that improvement's dramatic and you really want to take advantage of it, you sort of have to go back to square one and think about all of those processes. And there are some places where what the AI might be doing is more fundamental than others, and that's where you'll look.
Yeah, and I would love to explore the two examples you talk about in the book. The one is the healthcare system, where we need to move from this task level thinking to a systems level thinking.
Yeah.
And we've had AI in healthcare now for a long time. We've not necessarily seen the improvements that were promised initially. And you're arguing that the reason for this is that we haven't really seen the systematic change. Do you want to explore that in a bit more detail?
Yes. I mean, look, even without systematic change, there's a lot more that can be done in healthcare. There's no doubt about that, because what medical physicians and others are doing is trying to diagnose patients. In other words, they're facing uncertainty. What is wrong with this person? And they're trying, therefore, to choose an intervention that will help them. Artificial intelligence will be able to improve that diagnostic process, and you'll be able to help more patients that way. But what happens within the course of, if we think even larger, it's not just diagnosis, it's the sort of full recovery and treatment of the patient as well that can really be informed by artificial intelligence. Just to give you one example, many people are admitted to hospital. They have usually symptoms, there's something wrong. The doctors may have some theories about what is causing the issues, and artificial intelligence can help there. But they're taking up a hospital bed while that's worked out. And sometimes a treatment occurs, an operation or so forth, and you have to wait a few days to see if it works and there's no complications, etc. What artificial intelligence may well be able to do is give hospitals a better prediction of when the patient is likely to have these complications that will need further interventions or not. The benefit of that is it's not so much knowing, okay, we'll need more interventions. It's the alternative where, oh, look, this seems to be working, and it's actually, little did we know that it's actually very low risk to send the patient home. And we can do that more often, and maybe we send them home with some Internet of Things like monitoring devices on them. But the upshot of it is instead of taking up a bed for a week, the patient's taking up a bed for 2 days. Do that sort of thing across enough patients, and all of a sudden your hospital actually has much higher, at least, bed capacity than you previously thought. And so, hospitals may measure their, how well they're doing things by how efficiently they can match the supply of patients, the demand for hospital services with the actual supply of patients coming in, and improve capacity utilization, which in turn informs on expansions and all those big capital things. But if you have artificial intelligence, all of that sort of flips on its head. the goal of artificial intelligence, sort of free up capacity. And, if you roll that forward, the hospitals that you have can be smaller. If they can be smaller, they can be more distributed throughout uh, where people are and things like that. And so that's the kind of transformation. In other words, you start to think about yourself, okay, if I'm looking for sources of uncertainty, one of my big sources of uncertainty in healthcare is that I have to keep patients under observation, not because I can fully articulate what might occur, but just because something might occur. So I play it very risk averse. But if I'm given artificial intelligence, I might have more confidence not to do that. And that's good for everybody. It's good for everybody. And so once you start seeing it through that lens, you go past a hospital, you go into a hospital and you look at it as a big monument to uncertainty. It looks like it's all there because we don't know stuff. And that's big buildings. That's not like small little tasks things. So that's the kind of transformation that's going to occur. But you can imagine that's not going to occur overnight. No one's going to do a study and say, hey, look, like all the patients we can throw out in 2 days rather than 7, let's shut down the hospital. People are going to want to see that in action first. So that's, you can see how that then expands, getting the benefits of AI from immediacy to decades.
Yeah, and I guess you talk about the in-between times that we're in at the moment, very similar to other industrial revolutions, that the technology was developed, and then to have the real impact, we need the systematic change, which takes a long time. It needs to overcome some hurdles, but at the same time, it will potentially transform so many different industries and businesses. And you talked about the fact that you want to reduce uncertainty. I like the fact that you have a chapter on hidden uncertainty.
Right.
And I really like the airport example, where you talk about the fact that how airports have basically transformed, creating these destination places where airports invest billions of dollars to get us to the airport earlier. Reason for this is that we have uncertainty, and actually, if you compare this with luxury travel, where someone travels on private jets, they don't have any of that. They turn up the airport, there's no shop, there's no gym, there's no cinemas and swimming pools, whatever they now have in big airports, and they simply walk on a plane and fly off.
Right.
So do you want to expand on that a little
Sure.
bit?
Yeah, certainly. Let's actually think about the private jet experience. Not that I've experienced this, but I've at least read about it. The terminal is a different one. It's a small little terminal, usually at the main airport. The plane is going to be able to leave when the passengers are there. And so as soon as the passengers get there, so long as there isn't any disruptions because of weather or anything like that, the plane can just go. That means, of course, the wealthy doing that, one of the big advantages is there's no waiting time. So there's no need, there'd be no benefit of making these private terminals very fancy. Just have a few seats, check some things out, and off everyone goes. Whereas if you compare the experience now then on commercial airlines, it's very different. Just getting to a flight on time can be a huge challenge. At this time when we're coming out of the pandemic, and there's some shortages of labor at the airports, we're being told to come 3 hours ahead of a flight. 3 hours ahead of a flight. Now, that seems crazy. I mean, if you've got a 7 a.m. flight, they're telling you to actually get there by 4 a.m. That's costly. Now, we all kind of know you don't need to do that. For instance, there are apps that you can get that track incoming flights and tell you if the plane is there, tell you if it's going to be delayed, etc. If there was information on the length of the security lines and so on, you could utilize that. And so you can imagine a world in which you took all that information and you told people who are traveling exactly what time they should leave their house or their workplace to catch the flight in some sort of reasonable manner. And so you can reduce this average waiting time from hours to, well under an hour. Okay, well under an hour, people are happy to sit at a book at the terminal and read a book or something like that. When you've got many, many hours of waiting, it's a whole different thing. You're interested in what sort of food you can have. You don't have much to do, so they can give you things to do. It's probably a good time to go shopping. is a fairly natural thing to put there, and you can do all of that. And so obviously airports have done that. And I have to tell you, with my economist hat on, what's the incentive in an airport to get everybody out on time when at the same time they've got some businesses that rely on them not getting out on time? So, that seems to be a conflict of interest right there. So from that perspective, the airports, have decided to give up on consumer waiting and just to lower the cost, or even better, make it sort of pleasurable to wait, and so that you don't think about waiting. If artificial intelligence comes in, it can dramatically reduce that waiting times. Imagine if that was dropped tomorrow. The disruption to the airports would be enormous. It'd be enormous. They would either have to get significantly better at being a destination so that people didn't care about getting there late. So they'd have to have some unique things that would draw you to an airport and make it all exciting as part of the holiday or wherever you're going itself. Or alternatively, they're going to see those revenues drop and those businesses start to struggle, and they're going to have to drop the rent. And in the meantime, everybody's going to be wondering why we have to walk past all this to get to our gate. So, and the immediate effect of that is going to look very disruptive. It's not going to look great on productivity statistics or anything like that. But it's, it's natural when you get artificial intelligence can flip an entire rationale for an industry, in this case, the industry of what happens in an airport terminal, on its head.
Yeah, and then it has impacts in so many different areas. In the book, you talk about the fact that we have seen COVID as a health problem. It is actually an information problem, very similar to the airport example, right?
Yes. I mean, what we did during COVID, it does strike everybody sitting back as saying, well, that was weird. We all decided to lock ourselves in our homes. Why? And we sat there for months on end, not having COVID, and sometimes not even knowing people who had COVID until the most recent Omicron set of waves. So it was a very bizarre. That wasn't the pandemic popular culture had promised us, where everybody was sitting there living in terror and fighting over basic food. There was a brief scuffle over toilet paper. That was it. But why were we sitting there? Well, sitting there is because we didn't know, if we went outside, who was infectious and who was clear. And we really didn't know it. I mean, at any given time, you take a group of 4,000 people, there might have been one person who was infectious with COVID. And our reaction was to treat all 4,000 as being equally infectious. Now, what if we had, better information, perhaps powered by AI, that could predict whether a person was more likely to be infectious from COVID or not? Well, if we can do that, and then we can assess that you're very unlikely to be infectious or even have COVID, we can let those people live their lives normally and only isolate or pay attention to the ones who are more at risk. And it's not a crazy notion. It's already part and parcel of our some little clues we use, such as symptom checks, or we used exposure. If you've been exposed to someone with COVID, or to some extent, if you've gone to a place that already has a lot more COVID than the place you're currently at, we use those things. But one can imagine we could do so much more. And then we just have to decide, are we going to get serious about that information? Because if we collect all this information and we really can tell who is infectious and who is not, well, then people are going to have a very different attitude about being told to stay at home. They're going to say, well, I don't have to stay at home unless I'm really a risk. And so we have to change the whole playbook for how we manage these sorts of pandemics. But the benefits are massive. The benefits are massive.
Yeah, absolutely. The other area you touch on is education, where you make the point that we, in order to move to the level of change that we would like, there are barriers in existing systems, because we can put in place AI systems that give us personalized education experiences. They work well on a one-to-one level, but once you then go back into the school setting where you have age-based groups, they can't really distinguish by progress and talent and where you are in certain topics. And this then creates limitations of how quickly we can see the systematic change and therefore make a really big impact with AI. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so I mean, schools are run on an industrial model where we organize children and sort them into educational places based on their date of manufacture. Which is which when I put it that way, you already see how crazy that is. And we distort a lot of things that way as well, because we have these arbitrary cutoff dates, and all of a sudden you could be a few days away from being the oldest to the youngest person in a class, and that can matter as well. But we assume that that's the only thing that matters, which is a little crazy, because we know that there are all sorts of differences between kids in how they learn, how they respond, and the speed at which they take up things, and which subjects they are better at, etc. So imagine once again that we suddenly are able to go into a beginning of school, or just a few years, and assess kids, and come up, oh, look, each of these could have this individualist plan. And then we hand that to the teacher, and the teacher said, like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? You've handed me a class that's organized by age. I know all these kids are a little bit different. I can tweak this way and that. It's very nice of you to tell me, but I can't really take advantage of that. And I don't know if it would be better to organize education by kids who have the same type of learning experience should all go, be in a single class, and how you would even organize that. I have no idea, by the way. I'm just pointing out that that's the problem. Yet here we are very clear on the benefits of tailoring education, and yet we have a system that was founded because we had zero information. So, it's over a century ago, essentially, across all these countries, and that it's too stuck. How would you even get out of it? So I think, that's yet another case where there are issues, and that's only doing it within the context of the school, not in the context of broader things such as lifelong learning, and then also mannering. Is it all about the learning, but it's also about the social learning as well? If you do my little thing of sorting kids into their one place and putting them into different classes or different schools, is that a good idea? I don't know. There's worlds in which that's a terrible idea. So it's like re-envisaging all that is a monumental task, but yet there's a lot of people sort of trying to understand individualized learning and using AI to better tailor what the kids can do. But we just don't have a system to support that.
Yeah, and you talk about the greatest system of all, and actually is there will be some impact when you change the systems, but how about innovations that will change the innovation system, which I found really interesting.
Yeah. So one of the things we look for, we wondered, where is AI actually changing how people sort of organize things? And the place we found that seemed to be closest were scientists using AI to develop new innovations, and they start to learn about things. Just recently, DeepMind, which is an AI part of Google, uh, used artificial intelligence to do something I guess you would never have thought was uh, a use for artificial intelligence, which was to work out better ways of solving uh, matrix algebra. I don't want to go into too much details, but more complicated matrix algebra. Now, from my thing is that, didn't we know everything we need to know about matrix in high school or advanced mathematics or something like that? And the answer is no. When you get to very, very complicated uh, tables and data sets with multiple dimensions, being able to manipulate those and transform them in ways that are useful is quite difficult. So what DeepMind did was train AIs to do that with some sort of nudges towards the truth. And what was discovered were, yes, they discovered some of the old clever methods that people have come up with to do these things, but then they also discovered all these new ones. And it was easy to check that the new ones worked because you can just do it a slow way just to check. But it was enabling all these new insights. Now, what science is pretty good about is it has a structure, and it's maybe because the scale isn't that large, of being able to, this is a new tool. This is giving us new insights. We will now direct all our resources to align for taking that and making it something useful and workable, etc. And how do we build upon it? How do we understand it? And so there's a sense in which the innovation system itself is starting to align itself with artificial intelligence being able to do things, and people's jobs are immediately changing, and their roles within the lab are changing. And so that's great news. I mean, that's wonderful news. There's no better application for artificial intelligence than making better other things. And so that is what is occurring. So we see, mainly because the improvements that AI give are so large and so dramatic, that these organizations are changing themselves very quickly. And maybe also because no one is really threatened by that sort of improvement. The organization's whole goal was to do that. And so even right down to the lowest lab technician, people are comfortable that they will still have a role.
In the title of the book, you talk about predictions and power. So power is the other factor. I think you touch on this in a number of different ways. You talk about the fact that these disruptive forces could potentially take away power from existing incumbent organizations that hold this power today,
Right.
and they might resist, or the system might resist in some way.
Yes.
At the same time, AI can give new organizations power, and you talk about the fact that can machines have power in themselves. Do you want to explore this in a bit more detail, this whole power dynamic?
Yes, so you're correct. We put it right front and center as part of the in the title of the book, mainly because in a book about disruption, it's not simply, okay, I can take an engineering perspective and say, if I had to re-systemize this organization and do so, I can that's what I need to do. Well, we've got people involved. And people are going to care about what these changes mean for their position. And from an economist's point of view, and it's not the only point of view in this regard, your position, you're in a more powerful position if you can appropriate more economic value, which means you've got something, what you're providing is scarce, and maybe it's somewhat unique in the organization. And so let's take an example that's a bit more familiar, and that the story in the last decade, taxi driver. Taxi drivers were in a regulated, protected industry, and that meant that they could earn a great living because there wasn't much competition. Now, part of that was coming from regulation. And so, when Uber and Lyft and other ride-sharing services came in, they said, well, anybody can be a cab driver. But let me tell you that that wouldn't have been enough to have changed this industry. Why? Because the taxi cab drivers have been doing this for years. They knew their city. They knew the traffic ebbs and flows. Hop into an Uber with just any old driver, and they'd be sort of struggling to find where to go, and you'd be sitting there in a thing, and you say, a taxi driver wouldn't have made this mistake, blah, 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 etc. No, what was the real issue was that on everybody's phone, we now have navigation apps, and those navigation apps are free. It's a mystery of how that ever happened, but they're free and excellent, and they give you decades of driving experience of navigating a city, and they put that in the hands of all of the drivers. Now, when you get overcoming the regulations plus raising the capabilities of all drivers, from a taxi driver's perspective, they've no longer got something that is unique, and they've no longer got something that is scarce. In fact, it's widely diffused. And so they are going to be worse off, and no doubt upset about that. Now, you can imagine similar things would occur within organizations if you started adopting AI. Even if it doesn't eliminate somebody's job, there'll be some people who will be less important in the new system, and there are other people who will be a bit more important. Well, you can imagine the people who are less important are going to resist all of the changes, not just the adoption of AI, but all of the organizational changes that might accompany that. And we've seen this in past attempts by firms to adopt transformational technologies. IBM famously led the charge on personal computers. It was a big mainframe business, computers the size of half a room, etc., and the sales force to do it. And then they had an independent lab, and they developed the IBM PC. And for a number of years in the 1980s, that was the PC. That was the one that everybody was adopted, and it was taking off. And then IBM stopped. Now, that's great for the people who followed Dell, HP, Gateway, all these people who followed. But IBM stopped. Why did IBM stop? Because it was too hard to have salespeople go in trying to sell these big multi-million-dollar machines, and then get asked, well, maybe we'd be better off with these smaller machines. Can't they do the same thing? You're selling those. They can't be that bad. And that brand conflict was too much, and IBM was still earning most of their money off of the big machines, and thought maybe that would be in the case for the future, and so that change didn't occur. So they didn't get to own the next wave because of internal, we'll call it politics, but what it is there were winners and losers, and the losers resisted, and the winners, who were running the PC thing, well, they went and worked for other PC manufacturers. So, IBM really couldn't win totally. It was going to have to make some hard calls. And I expect the same thing will occur. And the real challenge is, can incumbents and established businesses do it? History has told us that, when you get these transformational technologies, you get startups come and take advantage of it. And you can see why. They get to start from scratch. They don't have to have awkward conversations, resistance to change, etc. They don't have to worry about a legacy business at all. So that is why, when we identify that real transformation from AI is going to require changes in systems, CEOs of current corporations need to sit up and take notice, because they are now potentially vulnerable. When will that occur? If I told you it was going to occur in 3 decades' time, your average CEO is going to say, well, we'll wait and see. And that's the problem. We're now in this between times where we just don't know when it's going to occur. And reasonable CEOs can say, it's not worth changing my business right now. But at the same time, some visionary entrepreneur might see how the new system might operate and start from scratch, and maybe for a decade or more not look like anything until they are. So that's where we are at the moment with artificial intelligence, this zone of uncertainty and opportunity. And why are we there? Because you can see why system change may be required to take advantage of these technologies.
Yeah, and the other factor that introduces probably even more urgency into this debate is that you make the point that in the whole AI world, it looks like the winner will take most, or the winner take it all, and that those organizations that are able to leverage AI and introduce some of the system level change will very quickly win. And there's this added benefit of early adoption where you can start training in AI and then create a feedback mechanism and then learn and make it better, so it becomes even harder for someone to catch up.
Yeah.
Personally, I think of companies like Tesla in the automobile, in the car space, where they have AIs running, they're making progress with their self-driving car algorithms. Do you want to
Yeah, so
expand on
that's,
that?
I mean, that is, something we do consider in the book, that whether these feedback loops, positive feedback, are going to uh, give all the benefits to the real first movers, the people who understand this. And history tells us that often is the case. That the first to sort of structure and build out a new system manages to keep that advantage. I don't think it's all hopeless necessarily. I can see scenarios, in other words, where having more data, having feedback, being years ahead in learning can help you. And certainly Tesla both is and is not an example of that. It is in the sense that its self-driving capabilities are in all its cars, and it felt it worthwhile to put it all there. It's not there in the sense that they haven't yet got to a situation where they can even recommend to people that you turn it on, or start a real fight with regulators to allow that, because there are a lot of things going on, and even that is a system. And it's not a system just build a car and the car works. It's a system of being really comfortable in terms of the full scope of returns. So there's one thing to have a car with a driver sitting there that's self-driving, that allows the driver to relax more, or maybe to do something else, like read a book or whatever you might want to do. That's one saving. But is that the real saving? The real saving could be that you can drive a car to a location, get out of your own car, and send the car off to park itself, or go somewhere where it's cheaper to park or something like that, and then come back and pick you up. Whoa, that's a whole other matter, because all of a sudden you now have these cars driving around with nobody in it. And you can imagine all of the issues that would happen if that were here tomorrow. What if that car got into an accident? Cars get into accidents. Who would be talking to whom? Who would be discussing whatever? Who would be clearing this up? What if somebody decided to just disrupt that? Or a teenager out for a lark knows that there's a self-driving car with no one in it coming down the road, and just hops in front of it. The cars, because we can imagine, will have extreme safety features on, and so they can never reach their destination, and they might never come back to you. So thinking about how that transformation can occur, you can already see all of the barriers, and you start to wonder if we'll actually see it at all. And it may not be the Tesla that solves that, but some other car manufacturer or some other startup that works out how to do this more properly. And it's just hard to tell right at the moment.
Absolutely. So how do companies go about preparing for this? And if you would advise a senior leadership team of a company, what do they need to think about?
I think it's important that companies especially in the C-suite, understand why things are the way they are. You know, when I said earlier that hospitals were a monument to uncertainty, you know, I don't know how many people who run a hospital system would say it in those terms, would even see it in those terms. Because the day-to-day issues and the issues that determine their performance right now have nothing to do with that. And so they may not see it in those terms. But, you know, the businesses, you know, the first step is to take a step back and say, okay, look at all these stories going on as they hopefully read our book. Where's the real uncertainty in our business? Why do we do things this way? And if a key uncertainty were resolved by AI, how would that change how we do these things? We did that experiment in our first book. We had a thought experiment by saying, well, what if Amazon became so good at predicting what consumers want? Instead of waiting for them to have an order, they just delivered it to them. And that was just a thought experiment, and you could see that, you know, that might lead to a very different system. It might be a good thing. Consumers may or may not like it. I don't, you know, we haven't seen it yet. Amazon had certainly thought about it. They had a patent on that idea even before we thought about it. The question is, in your business, you know, what's going to be there? And so we recommend, you know, the book is designed to sort of kick you with examples. And we can't actually tell you about your own business because we don't know about your business. But you can sit back and you can analyze what is going on here. And maybe that will result in an epiphany. And maybe that will result in just knowing things so that when somebody comes along with an AI that seems to do something, you can understand when that's going to require system change and start to evaluate if it's worthwhile.
Yeah, and this is why I like the book, even as someone that probably has read most books in this space and talks to companies about this every single day. The whole system thinking approach and some of the examples you give really made me think as well of how potentially bigger some of the more fundamental, some of the change could be in this space. So this is super interesting. Finally, just two questions I ask all my guests. What are your biggest fears about the future when you look at the space that we're talking about here? And what are your biggest hopes?
So I'm actually less fearful of artificial intelligence than I know a lot of people are, mainly because I'm rigorous in terms of thinking about what current AI can do. And it can only do predictions, so it can't do all these nefarious things. You know, the biggest fear I face with regard to AI adoption is that certain regulations to protect, you know, in the interest of protecting privacy or worrying about potential discrimination might cause us to reduce the level of AI adoption or shy away from it when it could actually be very beneficial and maybe worthwhile sacrificing some of these things to make it so. And you asked about fears, and now I've forgotten what the second part.
Your hopes for the future.
Oh, the hopes. My hope is that we can actually do this without wasting a lot of money on bad projects. You know, the danger I see, and this was back with prediction machines as well, is that people would come selling AI solutions to companies. But I think, you know, that wouldn't perform. And so, you know, billions of dollars would be spent on trying to implement these things that weren't really getting at the nub of a problem, really understanding it. And so, you know, my hope is, and our book is part of the step of that, is that people will evaluate these technologies more sensibly. So not shy away from them because they seem it's all going to be too difficult, but also not leap into things that look like magic cures, because I think that prediction is hard and integrating prediction is a hard thing. And just because we've had some success in being able to, order better what recommendations are given for music to play and things like that, that's the surface. There's a lot that needs to be done to get to that point. And I want CEOs to have a mindset that the good stuff is a heavy lift. The good stuff is a heavy lift. Doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. Just know it's a heavy lift.
Wonderful. Well, there's so much more we could discuss. We're at the end of this conversation now, unfortunately. Anyone who wants to dive deep into this really fascinating topic, check out the book Power and Prediction, which is published by Harvard Business Review Press. And if you're interested in any more conversations like this, head to my YouTube channel or podcast, where you can find hundreds of other stimulating discussions on the future of business and technology. Thank you very much, Joshua.
Thank you.